25 November 885. A grey morning over a loop of the Seine, where small, filthy Paris still squats on its island like a stone stuck in the river's throat. From the north, drifting downstream, come hundreds of longships, black silhouettes, shields along the sides, dragon heads on the prows. The monk Abbo claims there are up to 700 ships and 40,000 warriors. Modern historians look at those numbers as an awesome but come-on setting and talk instead about a few hundred ships and a few thousand men, not tens of thousands. On the island there are a few hundred defenders, maybe 1,000 if you're generous. Perfect moment for the city to simply disappear. But by the end of this story, one thing dies here: the belief that the emperor will always come to the rescue. And another is born: Paris as a future capital, and the elite that will rule France for centuries. Imagine you're a craftsman on the Ile de la Cité. Yesterday you were fixing barrels. Today you're standing on the wall, counting ships until your fingers lose track after the 100th. You know that back in 845 the same kind of visitors already burned this city and left only after being paid off. In the 860s they came back several more times, fast, greedy, like a robber who knows the door code. All this time Paris is an ATM on the Seine for them. Today it looks the same. The Vikings come for money and glory. On paper they hold all the cards. They just don't know yet that on this tiny island, their favorite style of war is about to smash itself against stone. To understand why any of this matters, you have to pull the camera back. We're in West Francia, a fragment of the crumbling Carolingian Empire. After the death of Charles the Bald, kings rotate often, rule briefly and badly. Power leaks into the hands of counts and local strongmen. On the horizon there is, in theory, some hope. By 884, Charles the Fat gathers under his rule Germany, Italy, and now West Francia. People dream. Maybe the empire of Charlemagne comes back, with order and one strong ruler. Meanwhile, the Vikings look at all this and see something else. Huge empire, convenient rivers, and coins that jingle exactly the same as before. By this time, Paris is not yet the city of light. More like dirty city on an island. But it has something the Vikings hate: bridges. After previous raids, King Charles the Bald issues the Edict of Petres and orders fortified bridges built to cut rivers like bones stuck in a throat. In Paris they build 2 bridges, one wooden, one stone, both anchored in heavy towers. The city turns into a cork jammed in the Seine. No ship, not even a small drakkar, can slip past without asking permission. For merchants it's a nuisance. For Vikings it's a lethal problem. At the head of this island, bottleneck stands Count Odo, son of Robert the Strong, the man who spent years beating up the Northmen and died fighting them. Odo is no king, not even the top feudal lord. By the standards of the age, he's a regional manager. A few hundred warriors under his command, townspeople with spears, and one very angry bishop, Goslin, the first real warrior bishop of medieval literature. Odo has no right to negotiate on behalf of the whole empire. But he understands one thing perfectly. If he pays, tomorrow this won't be Paris. It'll be a burned-out hole on the riverbank. On the other side of the river, the logic is completely different. The Vikings have perfected a raid subscription business model. We come, burn things, grab silver, leave, repeat in a couple of years. Their longships are not just transport but weapons. Shallow draft, crazy maneuverability, the ability to haul the ship onto land and drag it to another river if some genius suddenly starts building bridges. In 885, they decide to upgrade the format. Not just raid and run, but a full-blown siege. It's their first serious attempt to turn from mobile raiders into besiegers who dig trenches, build machines, and sit under the walls for almost a year. The main cheat code of Paris is geography plus stone. The city sits on an island, water all around, with only 2 bridges from the banks, and those can be turned into fortresses. The second cheat is something Charles the Bald once did out of desperation. The bridges are built so low and so solid that even the light Viking ships can't squeeze under them. This is not just a crossing, It's a plug in the artery. But there's also tragic blindness. The Emperor far away assumes these bridges solve the problem by themselves. He's in no hurry to raise an army. The Vikings look at the same structure and see not a wall, but a challenge. The Scandinavians don't show up as a random mob. At their head are leaders like Siegfried and Sinrik, and later they'll be joined by Rollo, the same one who'll later be linked with the birth of Normandy. They come up to Paris and follow their usual script. Demand to be let upriver on the Seine and be paid so they don't burn everything along the way. Yes, it sounds like racketeering because that's exactly what it is. Abo says Odo answers politely but firmly. No passage, no silver. For the Vikings, it's not just a refusal, it's an insult to their business model. At night, Odo and Goslin turn the city into a fully upgraded fortress. They reinforce the bridge towers, add extra wooden structures, drag up stones, barrels of water, pitch and wax. On the walls stand not just warriors, but monks and townspeople with whatever they can find. Someone has a spear, someone a woodcutter's axe, someone just a bucket of something hot. Odo understands. If the Vikings punch through to the bridges and burn them, the city becomes an open village on the riverbank. That means the first phase of the war is for those 2 chunks of wood and stone. On 26th November 885, what is supposed to be a quick assault begins. The Vikings drag siege engines up to the northeastern tower. Ballistae, catapults, battering rams. By medieval standards, a whole engineering park. From the towers, stones and arrows rain down on them, and then comes an unexpected weapon, hot wax and pitch. Imagine you're a Scandinavian in a wool tunic under your armor, and from above you get drenched not just in boiling water, but in a sticky, burning mixture that glues itself to your skin. You're no longer a wolf of the sea, you're roast meat. The first assault drowns in a bloody mess under the walls. At night, while the Vikings lick their wounds, nobody in Paris sleeps. Abo writes that in a single night the townspeople add another story to the tower, basically building a second fortress on top of the first. That sounds like heroic exaggeration, but even if the pace was slower, one fact remains. The defenders don't just sit there, they adapt. In the morning of 27th of November, the besiegers see that yesterday's target has become taller and nastier. They wheel up rams, try to dig under the walls, set the gate on fire. Bishop Goslin personally walks the walls with bow and axe, plants a cross at the front line, and turns liturgy into a battle rally. And again, the assault bogs down. Here the Vikings do something they usually don't. Instead of, "Fine, we grab what we can and leave," they settle in for the long haul. On the right bank, they build a camp of wood and stone, dig trenches, set up new machines, drag brushwood and logs to dry out the marshy ground and bring their equipment closer. The raiding army, used to speed and mobility, turns into something like a regular siege force glued to the city walls. For the local peasants, a separate hell starts. The Vikings live off their grain, their cattle, their houses, which turn into firewood for the camp. In the winter of 885-886, the siege shifts into a sticky, stinking phase. The Vikings try to bypass the bridges not with force, but with mud. They clog the shallows with branches, stones, animal carcasses, and prisoners' bodies to build a causeway and an approach to the tower. For 2 days, they throw into the river everything they can, including dead comrades. On the 3rd day, they launch fire ships. 3 vessels turned into floating torches are sent downstream at the wooden bridge. In their heads, the plan looks flawless. In reality, the ships sink before they reach the target. The bridge survives, but is weakened like a rotting tooth. On the 6th February, nature pushes its own patch update. The river swells from rain. Water presses against the same already damaged bridge. The wooden supports can't take it, and part of the structure collapses together with the northeastern tower. On the island, only 12 defenders remain on the wrong side of the break, cut off by the current. The Vikings offer them terms, surrender. For them, it's not just mercy. Live prisoners mean ransom, and ransom means silver. But the 12 say no. We don't know their names, we don't know their last words. Only the result, they're all killed. In the chronicles they remain a faceless number. For Odo it's a phantom debt he'll be repaying all year. While part of the fleet blocks Paris, the rest of the ships do what they do best. They sail further up the Seine and the Marne, plundering Le Mans, Chartres, Évreux, and even pushing towards the Loire region. It's a double punch for the Franks. The city is under siege and the hinterland burns. Inside Paris, the usual ugly things begin. Grain runs short, epidemics break out, bodies pile up faster than they can be carried outside the walls. And it's in this chaos that Odo makes the decision that turns him into a legend. He doesn't wait for the emperor to remember him. He rides to the emperor himself. With a small detachment, Odo breaks out of the city through enemy lines, at night, through snow and mud. Abo naturally paints this as near miraculous. We can safely assume there was a lot of bribery, hidden paths, and sheer luck involved. He rides south to Italy, to Charles the Fat, and practically throws the news in his face. Your almost capital has been under attack for a year. Charles, Emperor of 3 kingdoms, finally stirs and promises help. While he gets himself moving, the Vikings keep sitting under Paris like a tick that just won't let go. While the Emperor is gathering his forces, another would-be savior tries to break through to Paris, Henry of Saxony, one of Charles's key men in Germany. His force, exhausted by winter marches, reaches the city and in February attempts an attack. It looks like the long-awaited patch coming to the rescue. In practice, it's a bug with a tragic crash. The poorly prepared assault chokes in the ditches and trenches of the Vikings, and somewhere in that mess, Henry falls into a pit and dies. Imperial help turns out not to be a heroic turning point, but just one more corpse in the mud. By spring 886, the siege moves into the "everyone is miserable" phase. The Vikings strip the countryside bare, disease runs rampant in the city, and in May that same warrior bishop Goslin dies of illness. For the medieval mind, this is not just a military blow, but a spiritual one. The man in armor and in a cassock who held the line falls not to a sword, but to plague. The Vikings aren't exactly thriving either. A prolonged siege wrecks their usual way of war, discipline erodes, and the loot is far less than they'd hoped. At this point, one of the leaders, Siegfried, brings in old-fashioned Scandinavian pragmatism. He asks for 60 pounds of silver to leave. The Franks pay, Siegfried packs up his camp and leads part of the army away. But not all of it. Rollo stays, as if testing how much more this city on an island can take. The Vikings try another big assault in the summer and get smashed again. Paris, exhausted and half dead, is still holding. Meanwhile, Odo pulls off his second feat. He fights his way back into the city while the enemy is still around it and personally leads the defense. For contemporaries, he turns from a regional count into a living wall that refuses to fall. Finally, in October 886, the main player enters the stage, Emperor Charles the Fat. His army scatters some of the Viking detachments, he sets up camp on Montmartre and encircles Rollo's camp. For the Parisians, this should be the blockbuster finale. The Emperor, shining banners, decisive battle, a sea of Northmen drowning in their own blood. Instead, Charles opens negotiations. He doesn't want to risk his army. He doesn't want another Saxon Henry lying dead in a ditch. He offers a deal, 700 pounds of silver and free passage upstream on the Seine into Burgundy, which is already rebellious anyway. Now imagine you're a Parisian townsman who has spent a year eating rotten grain, hauling stones to the walls and losing relatives to disease. You watch as the Imperial army, instead of finishing off the people who burned your fields, gives them money and directions. There's more to take over there. For Charles, this is rational. He kills one problem by aiming the barbarians at another. For the people of Paris, it's a slap in the face. They realized that the honor and safety of their city rested not on the crown, but on their own walls and on their count's stubbornness. In the spring of 887, the Vikings sail away, loaded with silver, and leaving the lands of Burgundy behind them in ashes. Paris stays standing, in both the literal and political sense, but the city is no longer the same. The left bank, according to the sources, is so ruined and emptied that it turns from an urban area into fields and gardens for a long time. The right bank, on the contrary, slowly becomes the new center of life. The ground around the city is littered with the bones of men and horses. Birds and dogs drag out of the soil what people didn't have time to bury. On the political level, the consequences are even harsher. Charles the Fat, the man who chose to pay and redirect the enemy instead of fighting, rapidly loses respect. By 887-888 he is deposed, and the crown of West Francia goes not to a Carolingian, but to that same Odo, the hero of Paris. He becomes the first king from the Robertian line, ancestors of the future Capetians. The empire of Charlemagne finally stops being a real project and turns into a nostalgic myth. In its place, a different reality is born, a world where kingship goes to those who actually hold the walls, not to those whose ancestors had the right surname. The military legacy of the siege is just as important. It shows that a fortified city with bridges, towers, and a compact garrison can hold out against a much more numerous, mobile, and frightening force, if that force has no clear strategy or logistics for a long siege. This is the first time the Vikings seriously try to play regular war and get their answer. European cities and feudal elites have learned to defend themselves not with gold, but with stone. After Paris, the norm gradually becomes not, we pay and pray, but we build and fight. In the realm of myth, the siege of Paris lives in two layers. In one, it's an almost biblical story. A tiny garrison, a warrior bishop with an axe, 12 defenders of the tower who die without surrendering. Abbo serves it all up like a script for a medieval blockbuster, complete with numbers like 40,000 enemies. In the other layer stands the cold eye of modern historians. Yes, the figures are inflated. Yes, Charles acted pragmatically rather than purely out of cowardice. But one fact remains. In people's minds, it is here that faith in Carolingian infallibility dies and the cult of local defenders is born. Above all, the cult of Odo. This story isn't just about Vikings finally getting punched in the teeth. It's about how technology, bridges, walls, geography, an island in a river, and the will of a few hundred people flip a balance of power that on paper looks hopeless. It's about how an empire doesn't die in one grand battle, but in the moment when its ruler decides, it's easier to pay and push the disaster onto a neighbor. Paris survives, the Carolingians do not. And somewhere between the smoking corpses at the bridges and the quiet whisper about a new king, future France is born, a country where that city on the island will never again be just a dot on the river.